What's up, my friend? So good to be with you. I'm really excited for this conversation because you are one of my favorite people in the world. And now I get to share one of my favorites with so many others. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Can you please just like always hang around with me and introduce me to people like that?
Yes, you
That
got
would
it.
be great
You
forever
got
and
it.
ever.
Or I'll just make a recording and you can play it when you walk in the room. Introducing Elise Besler.
Love it.
Yes, I'm really excited for us to have this conversation today. I know that you carry a level of expertise around some specific topics that are going to be really beneficial to the people that hang out with me in this podcast, the Free Your Voice, Free Your Life podcast. And you and I have so much history. We go so far back, particularly around matters of the voice. And so, my hope is today to just reminisce a little bit and dig into the nitty gritty of what it is that you're up to now and what it is that you're working on as a voice and embodied leadership coach. And yeah, bring people into that world. But let's go
Love
back to
it.
the beginning for just a second, because our origin story starts with somatic voice work, which people who listen to the podcast hear me talk about often.
Mhm.
Um, but tell us a little bit about who you are as a voice user. Why did we meet there around this training with regards to the voice? And how is that? How did that influence your trajectory, your path to where it is that you are now?
Yeah, great questions. I, as a voice user, I first and foremost am a singer. I sometimes forget to introduce myself that way. Maybe the introduction, we could go back and say singer and voice and
Yes.
embodied leadership coach. Um, but singing has always been the thing. It actually is what allowed me to come out of my shell from being, a painfully shy child. I, used to hide behind my mom's legs with the fear of having to say hello even to somebody that I knew. And I remember being on stage with, with other kids as a young child, and it really helped me come out of my shell. And so I have such reverence for the act of singing because it was what allowed me to become, more of who I was meant to be. And still to this day, it's ever unfolding. And I wanted to study that. There was no question as to whether or not I was going to go to university to study voice. And then of course that naturally led me into working with other people and their voices as well. And I remember it was time to, when I signed up for a somatic voice work. I had never heard of Jeannie before. I just saw, an advertisement for it, and I was like, somatic voice work. Yes, sign me up. Because I had been working with a somatic therapist for a number of years at that time, and anything with the word somatic, which means of the body, I
Right.
was I was here for it, right? And so that was how I came to Berea, Ohio. Is that how I say it? Berea.
I wish I knew. If anyone's out there listening, yeah,
That
correct
sleepy
us.
little college town in
Yeah.
Ohio, and
Baldwin
yeah,
Wallace. Baldwin Wallace was
Baldwin
where
Wallace
the
University. Yeah.
training took place.
But yeah, that is how I came to Jeannie's work. And then I mean the game changing aspects of how I was able to incorporate that into my own voice, and then also into the folks that I was working with. Just made a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I just remember like I think that for so many of us that encountered those trainings early on, it was, it was the somatic word that was enticing. It was this idea of approaching the voice from a posture of understanding the body better. But then you end up in there and you're like, oh, this is changing everything. This is shifting
Yeah.
everything. And that's what's been so cool about our relationship, because the origin story is in that place, but we've both sort of been on this process of personal transformation and also aiding others in their journey along the way. And so we've been able to share in that joy of personal growth, but also in and inspiring that change in others. And from the somatic standpoint is sort of the launch pad, which is anyone who's spent any time with me knows that I always do my best to start the conversation from the place of the body, because yeah, it's just the most objective truth that we have. And I know that you relate to to me in that regard. Tell us just a little bit about your journey as a singer personally. Like, so you, what kind of music did you make? What kind of music do you make? How have you been out in the world using your voice in that regard?
Well, I always, I grew up loving pop music,
Mhm.
pop, soul, R&B. And, my biggest influence were like Annie Lennox and Whitney Houston. And, I just sort of was all over the map, but in that pop zone. And I studied at a jazz program.
Yeah.
And so then that sort of brought in a little bit more of a bluesy sound for me, like, or the interest of going there. And when I graduated college, I recorded an album when I was, oh my gosh, like 21, 22 years old. And that was my first steps into writing music. And it was this, I don't know, I would say like a mix, a blend between soulful pop and pop. It was all done electronically. I worked with a producer in his home studio in my hometown of Edmonton, Alberta. And, uh, and then I didn't.
Mm.
And then I didn't. I had, some notable gigs and I had some of the songs placed in some television shows and some commercials. And, I for some reason I reclused back. I shouldn't say for some reason. I know the reason. I sort of reclused back into that shy, not using my voice. There was a lot of fear around using my voice. I left my hometown. I moved across the country to be with my now husband. And there was this, even though I was working with other people and coaching other people to use their voices, I stopped using my voice
Yeah.
for 18 years. It was a good long time. And I remember going to shows, and I remember even like when I would sing my music, or Scott and I would sit down with the guitar and write a tune or two, I would cry when
Yeah.
I was singing. I remember that feel. There was an ache, and a real sadness that I wasn't using my voice. And then it was probably, I started doing all this work with the somatic therapist, and becoming a little bit more in tune with myself again. And I turned 40 in
Hmm.
2016. And Scott said to me on New Year's Day that year, he said, what are we going to do for your party in 9 months, in September? And, Virgos, we like to plan. And I said, you know what, babe? I said, we're going to record those tunes and I'm releasing an album on my 40th birthday. And that was when it was, at that point, it was kind of like she got her groove back,
Yes, Stella, bring
And
it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the, sort of, when I say the rest is history, I mean, that just sort of began this next part of my journey for me. Um, and I'm really glad that I did it. People say, oh, you can't do things when you're older. No, that's when my musical journey started,
Yeah.
was when I was 40. Yeah.
Man, so many people are listening right now. I mean, I think this is a really, like, I'm so glad you're sharing this with us because it doesn't matter how far you traveled early on in your journey with your voice. There's still this possibility of retreat. There's still this possibility, because life shows up, things happen, experiences happen, responsibilities occur. Some of the advantages of youth start to dissipate, and then we can find ourselves caught in a loop, caught in a spiral that feels like it's pulling us away from our passion, our love, our sound, our music. And it's not uncommon. I want the world to know that it's not uncommon for people that teach voice, that for people that work with the voice to lose track of their voice. And
Yeah.
it's, in fact, I'd say it's quite easy because when one is focusing their attention, their efforts on supporting others, it's easy to get lost in that. But I think that we often have the habit of telling ourselves that our story is somehow unique, that we're the real loser because we didn't stick with it. We are the one that didn't follow through. We didn't have the courage, and look what other people are out there doing. But I'd say that this is a really, really common story. And actually, it's a really, really beautiful story to encounter. It's kind of become the type of person I really love to work with in my work, because if you've had it in the past, you know what it is. You know what it is to be a
Yeah.
singer. You know what it is to
Yeah.
call yourself a singer. So when it's missing, there's just an ache within you until you find your way back to that in some way. And I love the 40-year-old album. It's such a beautiful moment in time to be self-reflective and go, okay, here's what's important to me. So what's the
Yeah.
name of that album? Can people listen to it right now?
Yes, an EP, so there's 6 songs, and it's called Lean In,
Awesome.
and that one is on Spotify, and then I actually recorded another full-length album 2 years after that. So, and that one is called Truth.
Beautiful.
And really just, yeah, really just a narrative to essentially that part of that time in my life, this sort of showing up and being bold. And both of those are on Spotify and from Elise Besler. Like no other, no other. Like anyone else, I've seen better days yet to uncover. I am impatient and I lose my way. I am like no other.
So you make this decision to record an album, you make that happen. All the while you are coaching others with their voice, teaching others about their voice, training your voice to do things. But things continue to shape and shift and evolve. So take us into your continued journey, both as a singer, as a coach. Why does it continue to shift and change after the album?
Yeah, it's once I mentioned that 18 years that I lost. Well, I didn't lose it. I mean, I was discovering more about myself, but when I started working, in somatics, or when I started working with this therapist, I recognized that the reason I stepped away from it, or that I felt like I couldn't step up to the mic, proverbially, um, was because I was having a trauma response. I was having a nervous system response. And, without going into the details of childhood trauma, which, I think to some degree we all experience trauma,
Yep.
regardless of whether or not it's big T, little t. And our bodies organize around that differently. And so I became so interested in the why behind the reason we don't show up,
Yep.
the why behind the reason we don't feel safe to use our voices, whether we're speaking, setting boundaries, or whether we're wanting to step up on stage and share our music. And so it was then that I recognized, like, I'm not the only one. Right,
Yeah.
like you said, there's all these these colleagues of ours that have a similar story. And for the folks that we work with in our own studios and in our own bodies of work, we all have similar outputs. And when I say outputs, it's like protection,
Yep.
right? There's a reason why that all happens. And so I just became so interested in what makes us tick in that way. And that was what allowed me to sort of evolve into the other coaching that I do as well.
Cool. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But I think that this is one of the primary reasons that you and I have connected so deeply, is because we just always knew that it wasn't just about singing, that the
Mm,
singing was the
yeah.
actual catalyst for the change. Like the singing was the point of inquiry. The singing was the curiosity. The singing
Yeah.
was the showing up, but it was also the understanding of what it means to show up. And when we say show up, it's like actually grab the mic, right?
Yeah.
Like you said,
Literally, hello, I am
yeah,
here.
the proverbial mic and the physical mic, like being willing to do that. And also I think too, like when you are teaching and coaching along the way, you start to recognize patterns in others, and you see the ways in which those might be playing out in your own life or have played out in your life in the past. So
Yeah.
it's quite significant when you're able to connect the dots and find inspiration in that. I know, I know so many people I've worked with over the years have truly inspired change within me just in witnessing the change within them. So
Yeah.
it's really powerful. So I think the cool thing about observing you is that now it feels like you've landed in like a certain level of mastery around some of these concepts and ideas, and maturity and how it is that you're speaking about them. And even, we were kind of like teasing and joking before we got hit record here, but that your title is this voice and embodied leadership coach, and you're like, that might change, which I love. Like, ladies and gentlemen, Elise Besler will pivot, pivot, pivot. And it's awesome because you're always sort of following the breadcrumbs, always following the flow, always following the alignment. But this voice and embodied leadership coach moment right here, right now, what does that mean?
Mhm. Ooh, okay. I'm having a nervous system response. I'm going to take a moment to, I'm like, that's a big question. Yeah. What does that mean? Voice will always be a part of what I do, whether it's, and I still work with singers, I still work with artists. And I also recognize, as you mentioned, like voice is the point of inquiry, like voice is the piece that brings people into my orbit. And so putting voice in the title is important
Yep.
to me. And embodied leadership to me is like, if we're okay, the word embodied is what we can dissect, right?
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? And
Yeah.
to me, it means that we're aware of the sensations that lead the charge, right? Our bodies come before our brains
Mm.
when we're born, when we grow, when we evolve. And it's also the operating system of our body.
Yeah.
And so to be embodied means that we're aware of what's happening in our body as the operating system. And so embodied leadership to me means that we can lead in our lives, in our work, with the folks that we're supporting, with the awareness that that our bodies are leading the charge, and that we then will cause, and you and I've talked about this before, but we're able to hold space with a more trauma informed lens. And I think that's important, especially in leadership, in coaching, in any time where we're supporting other people in their own transformation. We have to be able to know what's going on in our own bodies.
Great. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
really clear and awesome. And yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that today you and I are going to use some terms that people will likely have heard. And might not know exactly what they mean. And I think embodied is one of them. I mean, I think
Hmm.
that if you're, I don't know, sometimes I suspect that what the algorithm is feeding you and I, it might not be feeding everyone else.
Yeah.
But in my algorithmic, Instagram world, embodied gets thrown around a lot. Also,
Yeah.
trauma informed gets thrown around a lot. And so I want to unpack, like you just did a beautiful job of explaining embodied. To you, what does this trauma informed lens mean? Like when you think
Mm.
about that in your work and in your own life? Because the other thing, sorry, before I'm talking too much, but the other thing I wanted to say too is the other thing that you and I have in common is we have worked with a lot of different systems. We've worked with a lot of different people. We've had a lot of different experience and we've shared about that. So when we talk about something like being trauma informed, it's not just from the lens of being a coach, but actually from having received services from others who have helped guide us into healing and transformation in our lives.
Yeah.
So from your lens and your perspective, what does trauma informed mean, or what should we expect from that?
I believe that trauma informed means that we approach any of our communication, any of our relational connection with others, whether it be in our personal or professional lives, with the understanding that we have no idea what has happened in that person's life before we're having that
Mm,
particular conversation. And to be trauma informed means that we have an awareness of, again, I'm going to go back to our own bodies and how our own bodies can affect somebody else's experience. Like if I'm triggered, for example, by someone or by someone's share, to be trauma informed means that I'm going to rectify that within myself before I respond to them.
right.
And that is so that we don't further drive their responses and or make them feel like there's something wrong with them. um, because you're right, we have had many teachers, and I've also had teachers that have not been trauma informed,
Yes. Yeah.
and I've walked away from those coaching sessions and those teaching sessions feeling like there was something wrong with me.
Right.
um, and so yeah, so I think there's a way for us as in relation with others to have the awareness that 87% of adults in North America have experienced some sort of trauma in their life.
Mm,
And so when we're having conversations with people, to remember that and keep that front of mind and front of body, we can cause less harm.
yeah. I love the phrase you used earlier, like how it gets organized in our body, how the experience gets organized in our body. And I think that makes, like, just from a system standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. And if we talk about, particularly in the work that I'm doing around some functional vocal training, we often talk about it, coordination, as being
Mm.
the central nature of what it is that we're doing. And if we think about coordination as the ability to organize something differently,
Yeah.
to change the organizational structure, it's really beautiful because it honors the inherent nature of what it is that we've experienced in our bodies.
And the wisdom of the trauma, like the
Yes.
wisdom of the experience that our bodies are having around that event or whatever,
Yeah.
we've experienced in our lives.
Right, because ultimately trauma, the response that we have is a wise protective mechanism. It's
Yeah.
a means of gathering safety. And I don't know, like we talk about, this is again, you hear people say like that wisdom piece, but if you really just stop and think about it, if you stop and think about this, like that at a subconscious level, something that you might not be have even had, specific awareness around, there was this mechanism within you that was determined to keep you alive.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like so cool, so
Yeah.
cool. What gets tricky is when it no longer serves us and we're, showing up
Yeah.
still trying to survive, but we might not need to any longer, which maybe is a nice little segue into the work that you really think about, or how it is that you see the work that you're doing now, if you were to talk about that, in light of these terms. Yeah, explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think right now I'm developing and, moving into this next phase of my own work in that I want to in human design, I'm a manifester.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned recently, I went to went to a retreat a couple of weeks ago, and I learned that that means I'm a fire starter. I think you're a manifester too. I think
Yes.
we've had this conversation, but it means that I'm a fire starter. And I believe that, and I think that's why I pivot so much,
Mm-hmm.
because I get this idea and it's like I used to think, well, don't follow that idea because you don't know enough about that idea. But I really believe that I'm meant to start a fire and teach and teach people how to become trauma informed in their own coaching work.
Mm.
And right now it feels, it's so expansive for me because I can see how this work is supporting other people and the aha moments and the light bulb moments that people are having, like fellow coaches are having in their own bodies, and then taking that to go and share with their own clients, and the people that their family members too, their children, their partners. um, and so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that like the
So
next direction for me is
you
I feel
set
like I
people
kind
on
of went
fire.
off.
So I set people on fire. No, I'm just teasing.
I set people on fire. But yeah, I think the next direction from this current, this iteration of my work is that it's that I'm meant to share it with others, and I'm meant to share it so that people can understand it, for themselves, and then perpetuate this positive change, um, in the coaching world, because it can be toxic,
Yeah.
right? It can be toxic.
Cool. So, and just if anyone doesn't know, human design is a archetypal system for understanding oneself. It's similar to Enneagram and astrology and Myers-Briggs, all of these sorts of
Mhm.
ways of taking a test and understanding some archetypal features that you might have. But yes, I too am a manifester. We are manifestors. Okay, so practically speaking, if I'm in a coaching with you, and I know that you don't just work with coaches, you work with all different types of people who want to be maybe more free to be public with who they are, be seen, show up in situations where they felt fearful of in the past. Practically speaking, what does that mean? Like, what do we do? What are we doing? Are we singing? What's happening?
Sometimes we sing. It depends again on that entry point. That's why I said voice is still important in my title, because it's something that I want to always be working with. But yeah, I'm working with physicians. I'm working with public speakers, radio personalities right now. So we always start with the nervous system and awareness. And I have to like, with a caveat that it's not always safe for people to feel bodily sensations. And so asking the question, where do you feel that in your body? Or what is your body telling you? Or listen to your body is actually not super. We were talking about trauma informed. That's actually not super trauma informed, because for some folks that doesn't feel safe. But essentially, the way I begin is I share nervous system regulating tools. Um, and we actually physically test um, the body to see if there's a positive outcome. And when we use those tools, like 99.999% of the time after we've used the tool, that person or the client will feel it in their body. They'll feel a difference. And then we'll go and sit and sing the high notes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh my God, like listen to that high C. Like I was able to get that where I wasn't able to get that before. Um, because a lot of tension that is created in the body, and this is something that I learned with the most recent study of the nervous system that I did, is created by at a nervous system level. And so when we can regulate that, then I mean, the world's your oyster.
Okay, cool. All right,
Yeah.
so let's give people some nitty gritty deep dive education around this, because I think this is where people are really going to benefit from hearing your expertise in this area. Nervous system. So most of us have heard of fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Most of us know generally what that means to feel like triggered or activated, but there's a whole system of understanding and learning called polyvagal theory. If you
Mhm.
um, haven't heard of that before, it's a system for understanding how it is that the nervous system, um, again, like we said, organizes our experiences and our traumas or our excitement or our emotions. Uh, but tell us more. Give us a quick breakdown of give us polyvagal theory 101 in the simplest form. Pretend we don't know anything. Pretend I don't know anything.
Sure. I mean, the most simple way that I can describe this, and I'm sure if Stephen Porges or Deb Dana, who are like the two main teachers of this theory, heard me say this, they'd be like,
They
it's
probably don't
pretty
listen.
simple. They probably don't listen, but essentially our bodies are always looking for safety. Our nervous system has a hierarchical system. There's three different states. There's the safe state, which we know as regulation, or the way it feel when it feels safe to speak up, or it feels safe to be around and be ourselves and be authentic. Um, and then we have that sympathetic mobilized energy, which is the fight flight energy. And we all know that. It's not all bad, by the way. I mean, we need that energy as well, like when we're dancing or when we're, going hiking or swimming or anything like that. So, but there is that middle area, and that lives sort of right around the diaphragm and the heart area. And then we also have this state, which is like a collapse state. And we know that as like depression. We know that as not being able to get out of bed. We know that as frozen, not being
Mm-hmm.
able to speak up, right? And so basically, this is the simplest way I can describe it, that our bodies are always trying to get to that safe space, the nervous system. And typically, if we're not regulated and we don't have regulation tools, we'll waffle back and forth between the mobilized and the collapsed energy. And that's what keeps us in that sort of anxious collapse state. And the thing about the vagus nerve is that if we're talking about it in the voice, in the aspect of the voice, it actually makes the vocal cords vibrate. And
Yeah.
so when it's not toned, when that part of the nervous system isn't toned or not regulating, well, we've got vocal tension, we've got the throat closing up, not being able to speak up, we've got shaking happening in our voice as well. So, that's the best way that I can describe it really simply. There's obviously way deeper, we can dive way deeper into it, but essentially, yeah, our bodies are always looking for safety.
I love that
And
because that's the opposite of what most of us believe most often to be true. Like you hear about
yeah,
fight or flight response and you think about that as your body trying to, or maybe your body making things more difficult for you. It's like, oh,
right.
I can't get this under control. Like, this body is
Yeah.
really messing things up. My knees are shaking, my armpits are sweating, you name it, whatever it is. And to just have that reframe of like, this is your body's attempt to move back into safety. I think that's a significant shift. I also just wanted to say, though, for anyone who doesn't know, the vagus nerve um, is a bundle of nerves essentially that begins at the base of the skull and the back of the head. And it's travels. The vagus means traveling in Latin, but it travels throughout the body down to the base of the spine, essentially, where touching all of these uh, organs and systems that happen automatically. So
Yeah.
things like breathing and things like your heartbeat and things like your
Digestion. Yeah.
digestion, and so that's why the vagus nerve would be um, connected to your sound, and there's an automatic nature to how it is that you're making your sound. Anything that happens in your body that you're not thinking about happening, that just is sort of like an happening on automatic response, the stuff that happens while you sleep too.
Mhm.
Like that's a good way to think about it. Like what's
Yeah.
happening with me while I'm sleeping? Well, your heart's beating, you're breathing, your food is getting digested, your liver, all of these different things are happening. The vagus nerve is partially, or not partially, is responsible for those things. And those are also the areas that you experience somatically when you feel triggered. So
Yeah.
if you feel fearful, whether you're mindful of it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, you know that if I asked you right now to think about that from a somatic perspective, you might know the feeling in your stomach, you might know the pit in your stomach, you might
Mhm.
know the speed of your heart, you might know the clench of your throat. You know, you, like I said, the sweaty palms, the shaky knees, the armpits, it's all connected to that sort of automatic, and in nervous system stuff, the term that gets used is autonomic, but
Mhm.
that refers to the automatic nature of the nervous system. So if I'm sitting with you and we're in a session and we're doing the tests, like what does that mean? What do those look like?
Yeah, so, I think to add to what you were just saying there as well, it's, the our brain, the way our nervous system and brain work is that our body sends signals to our brain and our brain interprets them. And so if those signals of fight, flight are perceived as a threat, then our brain will create what I call protective outputs. And I mentioned that earlier. And this comes from a neurosomatic intelligence point of view, and which is the certification that I just finished. And I tell you, like, that's a game changer to understand that. It's what really helped me understand that those signals are not of, are not bad. Like, none of them are bad.
Mm,
The collapse state is not bad. The fight flight state is not bad. It's how our brain is perceiving it,
right.
right? And so these drills that I teach and that I use myself are essentially, you know, a way to create felt safety in our bodies. So when we're about to, let's say, step up to the microphone, right? Let's say we know our throat always closes up. Well, we actually specifically use exercises that target the nerves and the muscles around the throat to help release them, to send a signal of safety to our brain so that those muscles and those nerves release. And it makes speaking a little bit easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I say we test it, I mean, we usually test by turning our neck from side to side. Like, actually, if you did that right now and just turn your head from side to side, and hopefully the folks that are listening will be doing this as well, you may notice some tension, right? And then if we do an exercise where we'll do a straw breath, are you okay if I do an
Yeah,
example?
please, by all means.
Okay, yeah. So let's do an example of a really quick, this is a really quick vagus reset exercise, and it's just a short inhale and a long exhale through pursed lips. So let's do it together. We'll breathe in for 2 counts
Mm-hmm.
and then breathe out for 6. And then we'll do it one more time. Breathe in and breathe out. And then notice, did anything change? Turn your head again from side to side and notice if anything shifted in the way your neck feels.
Yep, it did.
And so, because, like you mentioned, so the vagus nerve exits our brainstem, that's what we're targeting. And that's why we test there, right?
Yeah.
So, FYI, if anyone's listening that works with anxiety, that is one of the best ways to tone down anxiety, whether it's performance anxiety or just like generalized anxiety. Um, but yeah, essentially we do that. And it's not just vagus nerve that I work with. It's like all the different cranial nerves. Cause they are the first, there's inputs into the brain from all of the nervous system parts of our body.
Yeah, cool. That, I don't know if you've ever heard of, um, that is very similar to what's called the physiological sigh, which
Mm,
there's a video with Andrew Huberman that I would recommend people look up, that talks about the exact specific science of the physiological sigh, which is this thing that happens naturally, like when you're done crying, and you go,
Mhm.
and it's a natural mechanism, natural response within the body to alleviate stress and tension. And so you can duplicate that experience in the moment. The only shift of difference in what you did is that there are two inhales, that you do
Yeah.
a quick inhale and then another sip and then the
Mhm.
slow exhale. But I've used this often in my own
Mhm.
life when I start to feel the tension or the constriction creep up
Yeah.
and how it is that I'm feeling. Um, okay, so then I turn my head and I blow air. Then what happens? Like, how does that change anything for me? Why does that matter?
So essentially what's happening then is there's a different felt sensation in the body, and I mentioned earlier that the nervous system is the operating system. So if those signals are coming to the brain from the body, it's like we're creating better quality leads, right?
Okay.
Essentially what we're doing, and the reason we practice these, daily, or for my clients before we do their singing work or their other work in our sessions, the reason we practice these daily is to create a greater capacity to be able to sit with challenging situations. So it's like changing the signals, essentially, right? When the signal of safety is coming from our brain isn't going to perceive it as threat, right? Because let's be real, when we're having triggers, usually it's not that there isn't, because of course there are situations when we are in danger.
Yeah.
But typically when when we're feeling triggered by something or someone, we're using, or there's something that's happening around that organization of trauma from before
Right.
in our body, right? And so this helps to expand the capacity to be able to sit with challenging situations, to step up to a microphone, to set a boundary, like all of those things. It just becomes a little bit easier when our signals are coming from our body to our brain of safety.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like it's just setting oneself up for more success in confronting whatever it is that they're trying to confront. And I
Yeah.
also think that there's this, like, at the heart of this matter is the story, right? Like, that the story that follows the experience, like, and then the way in which we proliferate the story, because we keep having this experience and it validates what it is that we have created
Mm-hmm.
to be. And this is like going, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like,
Yeah.
hold the phone, like, take a beat, take a minute, take a pause. Let's see what's actually true here. Let's see what's really going on. I wonder if you might share from your own experience how turning your head and breathing. I'm totally razzing you and teasing you, but like how do you use that, or how has it created change? Like, are there any specific situations or circumstances? What's happened with you?
Yeah, there's a full vagus nerve reset that I do that goes literally from the base of the skull down to the pelvic floor, and I do it every morning.
Beautiful.
And I oftentimes will do it more times throughout the day, but essentially what happens for me, and of course it changed the more I did it, right? The more often I did this, is that my body feels different. And I don't know if there's any other way to describe that, but I have more capacity. I'm less triggered throughout the day. Will see my husband's pile of magazines sitting on the
Mm-hmm.
table, and it doesn't trigger me in the same way as it would before. I don't know if you've ever heard of the podcast, The Maintenance Phase. It's a really, really great podcast, but she talks about this concept in that podcast, bitch eating crackers. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, there's that bitch over there eating crackers. Like everything that person will do is gonna just bother you. So there could be a bitch over there eating crackers and it won't bother me. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it creates this greater sense of ease in my body. And then also things like my digestion have improved, my own anxiety levels have improved. And this is the really cool thing, my people pleasing has diminished.
Mm.
And that's because people pleasing is a protective output, right? It's a behavioral protection. And so when I'm more regulated consciously, like I choose to be more regulated, I have that greater capacity. So those are some specific things for me, that support. And then I also see it, in my clients when I use those exercises as well.
Great. Yeah. So concrete and really relatable. Let's talk more about the people pleasing thing.
Yeah.
what has that looked like in the past, and how does that differ from now?
Yeah. I mean, I think like it's okay. I just want to clarify, like it is okay to want people to be pleased. Like it's okay to want to please people. But for me, it was really toxic. It kept me from like being myself, you know. I would abandon what who I truly was in order to avoid conflicts.
Yeah.
With personal and professional relationships. I mean, oh my gosh, when I first started my business, I think you and I have talked about this before, but dang, like there were no boundaries. I was like
Yeah.
always bending over backwards, and then of course it led to burnout.
Yeah.
And so for me now, it's I'm able to, and I still do sometimes toxically people please, but I will be able to, in the middle of it, and this is part of the capacity thing, to recognize what's happening. It's kind of like being in the eye of the storm and like seeing all the stuff flying around you. And then I oftentimes would be able to make a different choice.
Mm.
And sometimes I've even said, you know what? I think I was actually in like a people pleasing mode and I'm working on that right now. What I really meant to say was this.
Yeah.
And that to me, like before, there was like that was a hell no for
Right.
me. I wouldn't even consider doing that. But yeah, having a more regulated nervous system has allowed me to be able to have more autonomy, or to own that, to claim that for myself.
Yeah.
Because I always had it. I think it was just a matter of, you know, it's a matter of not giving it away.
When I think that so many people, when they say something like finding their voice, that's what they're talking about. Like
Yeah.
that's the goal, is like finding yourself. It doesn't have to be a people pleasing situation, but finding yourself in any situation where you feel like you're not able to express yourself in a way that feels true, that feels
Mm,
authentic, that feels aligned, that feels connected. And what you're saying, which is, exciting, is that you can start from the ground up to understand this. Like you can
yeah.
understand this in a much more, it doesn't have to be so um energetic, even though it is energetic, but it can
Hmm.
start from the physical, it can start from the objective, and the energy can move out from there. And I think that that's really revolutionary, will be revolutionary for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, and I think too, like, we live in a culture that prioritizes brain first,
Mm-hmm.
right? And also prioritizes fix it strategies. And so I think what's happening, and my algorithm is the same as yours, but I've seen some really like alarmingly harmful things come up in that algorithm in the last couple of weeks, where people are like, fix your problems with nervous system regulation. Or, I saw a weight loss, commercial, an ad for weight loss using somatics and nervous system regulation to lose weight. Here's the thing, nothing wrong with wanting to lose weight. But like when we start using our nervous system work as a way to fix ourselves, we're actually bypassing the purpose of nervous system
Mm.
regulation, which is not to fix, but to befriend,
Woo.
right?
Yeah.
Like we're not trying to change anything. We're actually just trying to befriend those natural processes that happen in the body and then rewire those signals of safety to our brain.
But Elise, I don't want to befriend my nervous system, I want to change. How do you
Yeah.
help me do that?
So I'm so glad that you asked. I mean, change is scary, right? It's scary as fuck.
Yeah.
And it is perceived as a threat by our brain, especially when we're talking about beliefs and habits and mindsets, And I think that when we, again, and I'm going to use this, like kind of shrouding that change work in felt safety, there's different signals coming to our brain, and it makes the change much more like it's lasting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you've worked with someone or you've done your own mindset work and you're like, yeah, okay, my mindset has changed. And then like 4 hours later, you're in the corner, in a ball shaking again. Or, maybe that's a bit dramatic, but, the inner critic thoughts will creep up or the imposter syndrome will creep up. And ultimately, those are derived of a dysregulated nervous system. And so the more we can create safety around that change work, the more lasting the change will be.
Yeah. And the other thing that's coming to me as you're saying this right now is that ultimately it's our responsibility to create that safety for ourselves through developing
Yes.
these skills. Like no one is going to create the safety for you. You have
Yeah.
to, and that's where the autonomy comes in. That's where the freedom comes in. That's where the capacity to make choice. That's where the capacity to rewrite the story comes from, because you've taken ownership over this experience. Like you've
Yeah.
really stepped into, you've become the leader of yourself,
Yeah.
which is really cool and powerful. Yeah, and and you and I relate to each other in so much in this regard. And again, we know this from firsthand experience that the fast change that everyone wants, that we've all wanted, that I've wanted, that we all want, it doesn't stick. It
Mhm.
doesn't stick. It's the incremental change over a period of time. Now, I don't know what the increments are going to be. I don't know what they're going to be, but that incremental awareness is just how humans develop and grow. And you always look back grateful for the increments.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
go, oh, I had to know that, to know that, to know that. I had to know this.
Mhm.
Um, and and I just think about like that in terms of like really being aligned with the message of your body.
Mhm.
Like if I, like for instance, let's just imagine a hypothetical. Let's say I've never performed in front of people, and then I felt really inspired to um, audition for a reality television show, competition television show. This is entirely hypothetical. I've never met anyone that wanted to do this. Um, my chances of being able to stand in my body in that situation are not great.
Mm.
Because I haven't taken these sort of incremental shifts and changes to even know how it is that my body responds to being in front of people, let alone a situation that's of this high stakes and this priority, this high, level of opportunity and so forth. And so this is why, as humans, we have to really look at the context of what it is that we're hoping to achieve and trying to achieve. And it's not about like I'm not saying like get real here. No, there's magic. Like magic can happen, but it
Yeah.
has to be entered in through this state of, I love the word that you said, befriend, friendly awareness.
Yeah.
To use my meditation language, loving kindness, like this affection toward what it is that your body has to offer, this affection toward the information that you can gather. And also I'm obsessed with the idea that the signals aren't bad.
No.
Like if we can maybe even think of them from a place of neutrality, like
Mm.
that their fundamental nature is maybe neutral, like
Mm.
they're just offering us cues, like just the most fun, curious clues.
Yeah.
To me, that seems like it opens up a whole new realm of possibility. Is
It's
that
really
landing
interesting.
with you?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting that you mentioned that because one of the very first things that a lot of my client that I work on with a lot of my clients is taking out the moral value of nervous system responses or even thoughts, right? And understanding that those responses are that's actually your brain and your body doing their job very well.
Yeah.
They are keeping you alive. That's what they do. They work in cahoots with each other and they're working very, very well. And so when we can reframe that, yeah, from a place of like, oh, look at that. There's my brain doing its thing again,
Yeah.
right? There's my body doing its thing again. How smart and cool. I have this
Yes.
awareness of it, right?
Yeah. And for me, I think a lot of times we hear that and we feel like it's like a resignation, like resigning to it. And when you actually find yourself able to respond to that, it's fun. It's fun
Yeah.
because you go, and then what happens next? You start to see it playing out in other people and you start to get more compassionate about their
Yeah.
experience. You go, I was just at a concert the other night. I, I've said this on the podcast before, but I just got asked the question. I was at a concert the other night and someone said to me, is it hard for you to go to concerts and listen to other people sing? And, my answer is no. I
Mhm.
love hearing other people sing. And actually, I don't love to hear other people struggle, but I'm always curious about their struggle. Like
Mm.
it's not offensive to me, it's not irritating to me, it's not annoying to me. If anything, it's an opportunity for me to step into compassion and curiosity about their experience. And that's the gift of knowing yourself better.
Yeah. I think that when we know ourselves better on this level, like this level of the operating, system of our body, we're also able to, and you mentioned it, like be curious, and I think as coaches, as leaders, even just as partners and parents, to hold space for other people and their experiences. And also then there's a, an idea called co-regulation, right? So
Mm,
when we're in that place, we are also able to help other people get to that place as well.
right.
So when we feel safe, we can allow other people to feel safe.
Mm. Can you speak more to that? So what is that like what does that mean? So if I'm around someone and they're just like losing it,
Yeah. Yeah.
like you're saying that I can influence the outcome for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, barring somebody having a, a psychotic break,
Right.
right? Okay. So I just want to say I'm also not a psychiatrist,
Yeah.
but I know that, when somebody is having, and actually Scott and I, my husband and I have a really interesting phrase that we use with each other if we need to vent about something. We just say, "Do you have 5 minutes?"
Mm, hmm.
Because I need 5 minutes. Do you have capacity for 5 minutes of me just going off the handle? And it's really helpful because that context is helpful, but when somebody doesn't ask us for 5 minutes and is just like having a time, we can use our own presence, our own breath, our own nervous system regulation, and our own state to help them feel a sense of safety and come to a place of regulation.
Hmm.
You can see it in kids. I mean, my step kid was 10 when I met them, but I see it with toddlers all the time. Like parents that respond from a place of trigger or like
Yeah.
more like up, assertion back towards the kid is just going to really help the kid kind of ramp up their experience. Whereas if a parent is calm, the kid will then become calm. Right. And ultimately, with this work, Davin, we're just going back to first nature, right? Like we're
Hmm.
going back to us as children with our parents.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I think I don't know if that helps, but that's really what co-regulation
Yeah.
is the ability to be able to.
I'm just thinking about walking down the street and with my dog and someone else with their dog and their dog starts freaking out
Mhm.
and them going, "Stop it. Don't do that."
Yeah,
I always just have to giggle at that because I'm like, it never works out how they want
yeah,
it to.
yeah,
But yeah, but we do that with other people all the time. We freak out because they're freaking out, but the
yeah,
opposite is possible and true. And I think too, like, for anyone who's seeking any sort of coaching, whether it be with me or Elise or anyone, like knowing this to be true, knowing that someone can be in your presence when you're freaking out and that you feel like you leave that better,
yeah,
trusting that, because I think a lot of times we leave certain situations feeling worse and we assume that just must be the way that it has to go, like that
yeah,
that just must be a part of the process. And it's like, no, someone who's really in their body, someone who's skilled, someone who's masterful in their own understanding of how it is to regulate themselves, how it is to teach what they teach, how it is to coach what they coach, they can really set you up for a lot of success and feeling like you can do more than you originally knew that you could in a difficult situation.
yeah, yeah. And the opposite is true too,
Yeah.
right? Right. I think of some of the voice teachers that I had back in the day where, all I felt was shame
Yeah.
when I walked away from those sessions. It was not great.
Yeah. I mean, so many. Well, think about any teacher, think about in school or, even therapy. Like people have these
Yeah.
experiences in therapy. And again, it's going back to that trusting the wisdom of your body. What is your body
Mm,
telling you about the situation?
mhm.
And how can you honor that as true and respond accordingly? Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So do I have to be a coach or a leader to work with you? You said you like work with a doctor. Like who's best suited to do this kind of work?
I say anyone who wants to better understand themselves so that they can show up in the world the way they really truly want to, is an ideal client.
Yeah.
The folks that I'm mostly working with are people in leadership roles, right? So the doctors, the physicians that I'm working with are, they're in teaching roles, they're teaching residents, they're, in that sort of situation, or in like ER rooms where they
Mm,
have to be very, very clear and have very clear communication. And then, public speakers, folks who really want to be I use the word authentic, but just like showing up as themselves and not feeling like they need to put a mask on.
yep.
And so yeah, I say actually I had somebody reach out to me about my program that I'm starting in a few weeks, and she said, "I'm not a coach or a leader, but could I benefit from the nervous system work that you're
Yeah.
doing?" And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's marketing, right?
Yeah.
Marketing towards coaches and leaders, but it's like insert family member here,
Right.
and you've got it. So yeah, essentially anyone who wants to learn more about how to regulate your nervous system so you can
Great.
be
And
badass.
tell us about the program that you're launching.
Yeah, it's called the Embodied Leader Incubator, and I'm
Hmm.
calling it an incubator because it's like, it's 3 months of what I'm calling radical support
Cool.
for folks to understand a little bit more about themselves and learn, become nervous system literate, right? So that they can now understand when they see other people going through stuff, really kind of what state they might be in, and then how they can support themselves through that and also the other people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great. Put on their oxygen mask first so that they can
exactly.
put on the
Yeah.
other people's. Um, Before I'm going to ask you to tell us where we can find that. Before I do, though, I want to finish this out with just asking, where are your growing edges? Like, where do you want to continue to grow around this work that you've found yourself doing on a
That's a
personal level
really
or a
great, yeah.
professional level?
Yeah, on a personal level, it's going to be that continued discovery around my own personal trauma and my own personal, lived experience that I've had. Just like better understanding it and holding it in more compassion. I think that's a real growing edge for me, for a lot of people. Um, and then also to be able to continue to bring it to the world.
Yeah.
And I think that I can do that best by, yes, doing the work that I'm doing, but also by, and I had a little heart palpitation, by being creative
Yeah.
and by writing my own music and singing. I mean, there's that, to me, is a way that's still going to be a growing edge for me even now at 47,
Hmm.
7 years after the release of the 40th birthday CD. But I think that's going to continue to be a growing edge for me, to continue sharing that part of myself.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. And I want that for you and from you, and anyone who listens to your album is going to want more
Mm.
of that from you too, because I do, you said something at the very top of our conversation here that again is an idea that I try to continue to proliferate, that like something in you knew from a young age that singing was like the path.
Hmm.
And I just know that you don't escape that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Like people always end up needing to come back to that in some way, shape, or form. And again, there's no expectation or no specific outcome around what that is, but it's like finding our way back. And again, that ultimately is returning back to this sort of this known part of ourself, that essential part of ourself, the truth of ourself, the thing that feels most real, most authentic, most us. And so yeah, it's beautiful, really beautiful. And I think, for me, just to answer my own question, as I think about this work that you're sharing about in my own life, it's like I am a firm believer in, the realm of infinite possibility. And I just want to be able to routinely meet all of the exciting possibilities with increased capacity. It's
Mm.
like just I just want every bigger thing that comes my way, every new thing, every exciting thing, every difficult thing to show up, to just be like, I got this. Like I know how to meet this. I can feel this. um Actually, before I really close things up, there's one thing I think is really important that I wanted to ask you to speak about with regards to the nervous system. How do we
Mhm.
know the difference between being excited and being scared? Or how do we know when we're going on stage and we feel stage fright, if it's good or bad, useful or not useful? Like how do I even start to think about this?
Yeah, it's a great question because our body doesn't know the difference between the sensation of that feeling,
Right.
right? It's actually the presence of threat. So to be excited, like, so if I win a trip to, I don't know, if I win a trip to I was going to say Florida, but I'm like, I don't want to go to Florida right now. But if I went a trip to like whatever, Mexico or something, and I get that jolt of excitement, right? That's the same kind of jolt of excitement or excited, sympathetic, mobilized energy, if you will, that my body will create if I'm witnessing something really scary, right? So the difference is the thoughts that it produces.
Yes.
So if your brain knows that you've won a trip to Mexico, right? And I love my Florida people, by the way. There's the people pleaser in me. I have to go back and apologize for what I said. But like I know that there's a something really tangible and exciting on the other end of it. Whereas if I'm witnessing something really scary or I'm having an emotional flashback, my brain knows that there's something that wasn't joyous that happened. So that's the difference, right? And the difference between rest and then being in a collapsed state is that the same thing. There's like the thought that's produced is different from the signal.
Right.
So hopefully that's supportive, but our body, it really does feel kind of the same in our bodies, but right. It's like, standing up on stage with a microphone versus winning a trip to Mexico, there's a different challenge there.
Yeah. And when you haven't had the experience, you can only connect it to the things that which then might not actually be the truth of how the experience will unfold or needs to unfold. So there's this need then to step in with curiosity and go like, what's this really about? That's cool. Awesome. Well, Elise, I'm going to wrap this up here. I really, really am so grateful for you and grateful for this conversation. And I hope that people just feel a little bit jealous listening to me that I get to have these kind of conversations regularly with you because they're so rich. And so, just so fruitful in terms of my understanding of myself and how it is that I feel inspired to work with others. If people want to know more about you and work with you, where do they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Elise Besler. You can find me on my website, elisebesler.com/links. We'll tell you all of the things that I have going on right now, any sort of supportive free resource and any programs I have running or about to run. And I also have my own podcast called The Embodied Leader, and you can find that on Spotify and Apple as
Great.
well.
And I'll link up to all these things in the show notes. Okay, my friend, big kiss, big hug. Love you bunches. Until next time.
Thank you.